Hello, my name is John Brady. I work as the Deputy Director for the Central Coast Water Authority in Santa Barbara County, California. Our agency operates a regional drinking water treatment plant and an aqueduct that serves about 500,000 people living in both Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo counties. First of all, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to listen to this presentation. It describes a volunteering project that I've been working on for about a year and a half. Initially, the project was to try to establish a strategic alliance between the American Waterworks Association and the Asian Development Bank for the purposes of joining forces in the pursuit of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for water and sanitation. However, after I attended the Asian Development Bank's Board of Governors meeting in May 2018, it became apparent that bringing the best of American know-how and ingenuity within the water and sanitation sector will need to include an organization like yours. In this presentation, I will briefly explain some background information, the groundwork already completed, and we'll discuss ways that your organization can help in this effort. The Asian Development Bank is a multilateral development bank similar in function as the World Bank and serves countries within Asia and the Pacific. This service area represents half the world's populations in a relatively compact area. A circle with a radius of only 2,500 miles drawn over Asia will include 50% of the world's populations. More than 50% of those living in abject poverty live in the circle too, with only 17% of the Earth's landmass. This small, compact region of the world has great need and also presents an opportunity to significantly reduce the amount of human suffering in the world. If we can solve the problems for this region, it will have worldwide benefit, including benefit to the United States. The solutions that we come up with for this region can be used in other parts of the world as those areas begin to reach similar population densities. Through speaking with many people over the course of this project, I found that many people in the United States are not quite sure what Sustainable Development Goals are. So I'll start this presentation by briefly outlining the origin of the Sustainable Development Goals for you. My elevator speech on what the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are is this. The Sustainable Development Goals are an integral part of an international coordinated effort to pursue world peace. Although very concise and simply stated, this is exactly what the Sustainable Development Goals are. Imagine for a moment now that it is possible for water professionals like you and I to use the skills that we've developed throughout the course of our careers to actually help in a meaningful way in the pursuit of world peace. This is exactly what this project is all about. First, let me explain the United Nations. This slide shows President Truman giving his opening address to the United Nations Conference on International Organization in April 1945. This conference was convened to begin work to establish the original charter of the United Nations that we know today. World War II was still raging on as President Truman gave this speech, and this war was unparalleled in human history, as it was the deadliest conflict ever, with 50 to 80 million people having been killed. When you look at the people in these pictures, it is very likely that a large majority of them lost someone they loved in that war. From President Truman's speech, he refers to their great sacrifice and the need to prevent another world war from ever happening again. They did not want to just end World War II, but they also wanted to make future peace certain through establishing a structure and a machinery for future international diplomacy. They wanted to ensure that there will always be a place to allow for diplomacy, as well as a place for establishing international programs and goals for the good of all nations. I think it's important to remember the people you see here in this slide learned some very important lessons through the deadliest conflict in human history, and they wanted to pass these lessons to us, our children, our grandchildren, and all future generations. In addition to the effort to form the United Nations, there was also a parallel effort to find ways to rebuild the shattered global economy and to promote international economic cooperation. So many countries were left in ruin by the war that it was important to determine pragmatically how to finance reconstruction of infrastructure and how to quickly redevelop economies of countries that were devastated by the war. A trio of economic experts drove this effort to create a post-war economic order based on consensual decision-making and international trade cooperation. These experts include U.S. Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau, his chief economic advisor Harry Dexter White, and British economist John Maynard Keynes. Representatives from 43 countries convened in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, for the Monetary and Financial Conference of July 1944. The key concept of Bretton Woods was to identify ways to reduce the economic development gaps between countries, as this was considered the key to facilitating political stability and, most importantly, in fostering peace. Many institutions were conceptualized at this conference, including the World Bank and Asian Development Bank. In Secretary Morgenthau's opening address in Bretton Woods, he made a very important connection, a key lesson from the deadliest conflict in human history. Noting the effects of the Great Depression, Secretary Morgenthau said, "We saw their victims fall prey in places to demagogues and dictators. We saw bewilderment and bitterness become breeders of fascism and finally of war." He was saying that severe economic conditions can trigger a survival instinct reaction, and this may lead to an us versus them mentality, which in turn can lead to the ascent of authoritarian leaders, and this could pave the way to war. To break this cycle, Morgenthau reasoned that the real enemy is poverty. If poverty could be eliminated, the potential for war will be profoundly reduced. He also reasoned that prosperous neighbors are good customers, and that peace and prosperity go hand in hand. The purpose of multilateral development banks is to help reduce the development gaps between nations as a means to ensure world peace. The concept behind multilateral development banks is that they are funded and governed by their own member countries. This ensures consensual decision-making. These multilateral development banks provide developing countries within their service areas concessional loans, grants, and technical assistance for the purpose of improving the country's economy and raising the standard of living for its citizens. The actions taken by the multilateral development banks are guided by common international goals established by the United Nations. These common international goals are known as the Sustainable Development Goals. The photograph you see in this slide is of the civil society discussion at the Asian Development Bank's 2018 Board of Governors meeting, in which the bank's new strategy for 2030 was being discussed. A concise summary of my project follows. First, as a result of my initial efforts to identify volunteer opportunities in Asia, I kept encountering the work of Asian Development Bank, or ADB. This triggered me to research ADB to learn more about their work. I eventually applied for a job there and was interviewed and ultimately offered a job. ADB felt that they could use me to establish a stronger working relationship between ADB and the American water industry. Although I had to decline the job for personal reasons, I told ADB I would do this work on a volunteer basis. I researched the AWWA International Council and contacted them to discuss the concept of pursuing a strategic working relationship with ADB. The Council expressed interest and asked for a high-level conceptual proposal. I prepared the proposal and submitted it to the Council. They expressed continued interest, and this led to a series of correspondences between myself, ADB, and AWWA. Major milestones of this work include my participation in the 2017 AWWA International Council meeting to provide an update of my work, the International Council's effort to submit a competitive proposal to provide a presentation at the 2018 ADB Board of Governors meeting, my attendance of the Board of Governors meeting, and my presentation to the AWWA International Council in June 2018. Unfortunately, ADB did not select the AWWA International Council's proposal for a presentation at the Board of Governors meeting. So one of my objectives in attending the event was to learn what a winning presentation looked like to ADB. ADB offered 3 sessions where civil society organizations could compete to provide a presentation. When I attended these sessions, I found that all of the presentations had 2 things in common. First, each session had 6 to 7 speakers, all from different organizations. And second, all of the speakers appeared to have a well-established relationship with ADB staff. The AWWA proposal had 4 outstanding speakers. We were fortunate to confirm as speakers the current chairman of the AWWA International Council, Dr. Jack Angelo, the vice chairman, Dr. Chung, and 2 former AWWA presidents that are also current members of the International Council, Mr. Anderson and Mr. Kathari. The main lessons here are, first, we need additional organizations to join us. And second, we need to further develop our relationships with ADB staff. If our group is selected to provide a presentation, all travel and lodging expenses for the speakers will be paid for by ADB. And more importantly, we will have the opportunity to collaborate with ADB upper management. This photograph is of the leadership team of Asian Development Bank. This person here is Asian Development Bank President Takahito Nakao. This back row includes the vice presidents that reports directly to President Nakao. This person here is Stefan Groff, the top-ranking American on ADB staff. From his presentations, I found him to be very smart and absolutely encyclopedic on the needs of the region. On the first row, to President Nakao's left and right, are the directors. There are 67 member countries that form Asian Development Bank, and each of these countries appoint a high-ranking financial minister to serve as governor. Out of the 67 governors, 12 are elected to be a director and sit on the Asian Development Bank's board of directors. President Nakao serves as the chairman of the board of directors. If you notice, there are only 11 directors standing in the front row. This is because the United States has not yet appointed someone for that position. The middle row includes the alternative directors for each of the 12 elected directors. This person here is Mr. Michael Strauss. He is the U.S. alternative director, and since there has no one been appointed to the U.S. director position, Mr. Strauss is the acting director. During the Board of Governors meeting, I was able to meet many people to help advance this project. However, for this presentation, I will only describe the most salient meetings. First, I met several times with Mr. Morris, the head of the Civil Society program. He was very helpful in explaining the various paths to engagement with ADB, and he confirmed that organizations like AWWA would need a contract or MOU for engaging with ADB staff. In this photograph, President Nakao and Mr. Morris are listening to civil society representatives comment on the bank's new Strategy 2030. I took note of the individuals that appeared to be very knowledgeable and have experience with ADB. I took advantage of the fact that ADB provided a civil society lounge for representatives to stay between sessions. I approached the knowledgeable people that I noticed and asked them for advice on this project. They confirmed the need to secure a contract or MOU but also said it was critical for me to speak with the U.S. director to advance this project. They indicated that in order to get a meeting with the U.S. director, I would need to find someone who knew me and the director. This way, I would have someone to endorse me for the meeting. Since I interviewed with ADB in the past, I looked for the Human Resources Manager, Miss Victoria Francisco. I explained the project to her and how I wanted to try to meet the U.S. director. I asked her for help, and she agreed to endorse me, as she knew the U.S. director very well, and she knew me through the interview process and background checks. I wanted to ensure that I would see the U.S. director before leaving the Philippines, so I sought to get a second endorsement from Mr. Gregory Harris. He is the Senior Commercial Officer and Liaison to Asian Development Bank at the U.S. Embassy in Manila. He was the person that helped me get an invitation to the event, and he and his staff met with me for about an hour upon my arrival in the Philippines. I spoke to Mr. Harris during the President's reception dinner and explained my plan. He agreed to endorse me again. However, one of Mr. Harris's staff, Miss Cecilia Santos, saw the U.S. director enter the reception and asked me if I wanted to meet him right then. I quickly agreed. Mr. Strauss was very gracious and kind. I spoke to him for about 20 minutes, being very careful not to overstay my visit with him. He was encouraging and engaging as I explained the project. He identified some key people that I needed to speak to, and this confirmed to me that I was speaking to the right people. I let Mr. Strauss know that I had already spoken to the people he identified. I also told him the need for a contract or an MOU to facilitate engagement with ADB staff. Mr. Strauss then introduced me personally to Mr. Walter Powick, the ADB Director of Procurement. Both Mr. Strauss and Mr. Powick indicated that they would be happy to receive follow-up emails from me to outline possible next steps for the project. So, what is the path for non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, to engage with Asian Development Bank? First, I want to note that Asian Development Bank does not have a program to fund NGOs. Consequently, for project-related work, NGOs will directly compete with professional consultants. Some NGOs will submit proposals where only expenses are charged, while other NGOs may also charge for labor as well. To understand how to work with Asian Development Bank, it's important to understand their work products. Asian Development Bank has two general categories of work. One category of work is related to projects, which includes both building infrastructure as well as developing programs. A second category of work is related to producing Asian Development Bank's strategies and plans. The way Asian Development Bank assists developing member countries is through issuing concessional loans, grants, and technical assistance. For projects funded through concessional lending or grants, funding is provided directly to the member country, and the projects are directly managed by the country's implementing agency. So to find a role in a project funded by grants or concessional loans, the NGO will need to work with the implementing agency. Asian Development Bank also assists developing member countries through technical assistance. Asian Development Bank directly manages this kind of work and will make the hiring decisions for work involving consultants and NGOs. The most common form of technical assistance is for preparing the early project planning work prior to a specific loan or grant being issued. Other categories of technical assistance will include policy advisory assistance, capacity development assistance, and research and development assistance. Finally, Asian Development Bank will seek input during the development and preparations of their various policies and strategies. However, no funding is offered for providing this kind of input. I would like to invite your organization to join this effort. The scope of services that your organization currently provides will be of great use to over half the world's population. If you elect to join us, here's what your organization can do. First, Develop a concept of service that your organization can provide that will support ADB through the technical assistance path to engagement. Please note that the other organizations that have been contacted for this project do not offer the same kind of service as your organization. The idea is to build a team of excellent American organizations to provide a broad spectrum of capabilities. Next, participate in efforts to further develop the relationships we have with ADB. And this can be done in a number of ways. First, we want to be speaking with one voice, so collaborate with the other project partners in the effort to build a relationship with ADB. Next, consider sending representatives to selected ADB events. 3 of them listed here are the Asian Water Forum at ADB headquarters in the Philippines in October 2018, and also the ADB Business Fair, which is probably the most important one for this project to attend, which is in March 2019, and then the ADB Board of Governors meeting in May 2019, which is going to be held in Nadi, Fiji. Another way to help build a relationship with ADB is to participate in potential meetings with ADB representatives in the United States. And finally, to participate in a group effort to submit a competitive proposal to offer a presentation to ADB for the May 2019 Board of Governors meetings. Proposals are typically due by the end of January. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. Before I go, I wanted to point out one more thing. At the beginning of this presentation, I talked about World War II as being unprecedented in all of human history. I want to end this presentation by telling you about another historically significant fact. There have never been more resources brought to bear in all of human history to make the world a better place than right now. The reason why this is happening arises from the pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals. The international development community has shifted from talking about billions of dollars in direct aid to trillions of dollars in direct aid. The multilateral development banks are coordinating their work with one another. They're ramping up their lending. They're also recruiting the private sector to invest in infrastructure through public-private partnerships. This is truly an all-hands-on-deck effort. The work currently underway presents a unique opportunity for your organization to not only help humanity, but to also expand your organization's operations in a very meaningful way. The basic groundwork has been completed and a path to engagement with Asian Development Bank has been identified. If you would like to explore ways to join this project, I would be thrilled to speak with you. Again, thank you very much for listening. I truly appreciate your time.